Okay. It is 3:01, and we're going to call the Real Estate Committee meeting to order. Ms. Vaughn, can you take the roll?
Ms. Henry,
Present.
Ms. Johnson,
Present.
Ms. Brookins,
Present.
Dr. Borshade, Mr. Hikes, Ms. Jones,
Here.
Ms. Hubbard.
Present.
Have a quorum.
Let's begin with some introductions. Dr. Borshade.
I'm Dr. Bori Sade, the superintendent for St. Louis Public Schools, and then I'm going to go to my left.
Good afternoon. My name's Laura McLaughlin. I'm the school district's new chief legal officer. Glad to be here.
I'm Emily Hubbard, a school board member and chair of the Real Estate Committee.
Donna Jones, Board Secretary.
Hi, let's try this again. I'm Kimberly Johnson Miller. I'm the new chief financial officer. I'm excited to be here.
My name is Shamika Henry. I'm the Director of Real Estate and Planning.
I'm Jaronetta Brookings. I am the Director of Operations, sitting in for Chief Square Watson, Chief Operations Officer.
All right. Thank you for doing that, Dr. Borshade. We need to approve the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from February 24th, 2025.
Second.
Ms. Henry,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes. You should abstain.
Dr. Borshade,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Hubbard.
Yes.
Approved.
And then the next thing on the agenda is the presentation from the Parent Action Council Housing and Incentives Committee. So welcome to y'all. We're so glad you're here. If you want to introduce yourselves.
There we go. Good afternoon. My name is Molly Metzger. I'm a parent at Mann Elementary School. I have a first grader there, and I'll have a pre-K student there next year. And I'm also a professor at Washington University. I'm the chair for social and economic development in the social work program at WashU. But I'm not here with my WashU hat on today. I'm definitely here with my SLPS parent hat. I've been working on the issue of tax incentives in St. Louis for about 10 years. My friend and fellow parent, John Regenbogen, and I will be talking about why we think this is such an important issue. We've been talking about this for some years now. This is an issue that's upstream from all the things that we care about for the schools and for our city. So we have a presentation we put together. We have some humble recommendations, but would really love for this to be a conversation. We have some slides, but I also printed them out if it's helpful to have a hard copy. And is it possible to get the slides up? And the next one? Oh, perfect, thank you. So as many of you, but maybe not all of you, I know there are some new faces in the room, but you're likely aware that we have a group here in St. Louis Public Schools called the Parent Action Council. It's something like a district-wide PTO. We work closely with the district to fight for everything our kids need and our families need. And we have one of our active committees within the St. Louis Public Schools Parent Action Council is the Housing and Incentives Committee that John and I co-chair. And basically, we have two big priorities on this committee. One is housing for our SLPS students and families. So I'm sure this is news to no one in this room that we have 20% of our kids unhoused or insecurely housed in all kinds of conditions that are absolutely unacceptable. So we want to work with really anyone who will work with us to find housing for all our kids, and that's something that's really close to our hearts. It affects all our schools. Of course, some of ours, you know, in different ways, right? So that's one of our main objectives. And our second objective is really protecting our primary revenue source, which is real estate taxes. So as John will get into, when we talk about tax abatements and TIFs, these complicated programs that divert money from the school budget, from the school revenues in order to pay for other types of development, those really affect our bottom line. And so we need to be really aware of what's going on, really judicious in what we support, really brave in what we challenge. Because for a long time in the city of St. Louis, there's been this kind of business as usual of rubber stamping. You have developers that make campaign contributions to elected officials, and just for a long time, and it's changing now, thank goodness, but for a long time, business as usual was basically somebody comes, asks the city for a tax break, and we say, we're so grateful that you're doing business here in St. Louis, we'll give you anything you ask for. And SLPS, we are the ones who pay the price for that, for better or for worse. And so we have some ideas. We have 5 recommendations that I'll close with for how we can be really more careful and intentional in how we think about and decide what to actually support when it comes to that role of this committee. And with that, I'll hand it over to John to give more background information on the issue. And that's how you move the slides.
This one? Yeah. Okay, ready. Thank you, Molly. Again, I'm John Regenbogen, and I'm the proud parent of 2 SLPS students, one at Bush Middle and the other at Metro High. And just to touch base on the first slide here, if we really are active in the tax incentive and development programs here with St. Louis City, we can really also help facilitate the accomplishment of our goal of housing our SLPS students and families. So they're not disconnected. They're very much tied together. All right, it worked. Okay. The thing I want to begin with is just an excellent report prepared for our friends at AFT 420 by the national organization Good Jobs First. They do excellent work on a variety of tax and union issues across the country. And I believe did you go to the presentation last maybe January or February down at Harris-Stowe? Okay, I know several board members did. I'm not sure who all was able to make it, but it was an excellent event. They talked about charter schools and a variety of issues, but Good Jobs First, a couple of their staff came down and presented. And just, again, the title is so on point. And just to go over some of the big picture numbers here, between 2017 and 2022, from our ACFR reporting, we have foregone $168 million in property taxes. That's SLPS. They updated the numbers for 2023, and that was an additional $34.1 million. That increased 8% from 2022. So the total now has exceeded $200 million. And that's a lot of revenue that if we really dig in on the tax incentive process and really center SLPS, we could be generating a lot more in property taxes while promoting responsible and good developments in the city. I also want to mention that we've also learned that the assessor does not necessarily keep track of the market value of abated properties. So it's most likely that these numbers are actually higher than what is reported. And the other thing then is just going, when you look at some other annual comprehensive financial reporting, the ACFR reporting from other school districts, Cincinnati and Pittsburgh come to the top of mind. You can see how much our reduced revenues are compared to those districts. So it's a lot of money. Now, I want to go into a couple of examples of development. Now, this is an example of a really poor development that is in Soulard. Now, if you look at the shadow there, that's the shadow of my youngest elementary school, Humboldt Elementary. He's now transitioned on to Bush. Now he's in middle school. This is a project from a developer that received 100% tax abatement. And you can look at the rents there. $2,300 for 2 bedrooms. Okay, these are rents that SLPS families, even staff, can't afford. This opened in 2018. The developer promptly sold it for $36 million. How much is total being generated in taxes? It's on the land. It's about $5,000 a year. SLPS's portion of that is about 63%, I believe. So it's not good. Now, as Molly mentioned, though, things are getting kind of hot in St. Louis City, at least in certain neighborhoods. And these are examples of developments proceeding without tax abatement. And so they're generating right off the bat after completion some pretty good revenue for SLPS. Now, a couple I want to just spotlight. We have some rehabs and renovations. Then we also have some new construction. That one with the big 4440 there. There's another one, 4400. That's in the Grove, or on the Grove, in Forest Park Southeast. Those are both recently completed. And then you see on the bottom right, that's Adams School in the background, and in the foreground is just site development that just started just a month or so ago in Forest Park Southeast, and that's going to be like 28 townhomes. On the left upper left is a pretty cool conversion of the old Masonic Temple for housing, and then on the bottom left is an interesting, this has been particularly interesting. It is a warehouse conversion in Fox Park as part of the old Koken Industrial District, and they made the old style barber chairs. This is interesting because LCRA and SLDC proposed a 10-year 80% tax abatement. LCRA approved that resolution, and the alderperson, though, said, hey, we really probably need some affordable housing in this project. And the developer said, okay, all right, I'll just get more financing. And the project now is well underway with renovations, and it will not receive tax abatement. So that was just a little example there of some pushback that doesn't necessarily, again, stop development. Now, the good news, too, is that now the Board of Education and SLPS has a seat at the table. It's been a long time coming, but and again, as far back as 2015, a former chair of the HUDS committee, which reviews incentives at the City Board of Aldermen, said that developers had really come to expect incentives as an entitlement, and he said that needed to change. Now, since then, there's been some progress, but there's a lot more to do. And really, at the core of our thinking here as parents of SLPS students is that SLPS needs to be at the center of those discussions and reform. And again, it's our money, right? When we talk about property taxes, again, about 62% under the current tax levies go to SLPS. And again, those property taxes also make up kind of roughly an equivalent 65% of revenues. Now, just with the process, just really to go over that, just in general, there are some exceptions to this, but this is the general rule. Most times, again, a developer is going to go to SLDC, which is kind of the umbrella organization of an alphabet soup of all these different agencies that are quasi-governmental, but it is an independent nonprofit. In general, they'll either go through LCRA for tax abatement or the Tax Increment Financing Commission, the TIF Commission, if TIF is used. Now, TIF used to be used quite a bit in the past, but for whatever reasons, it's used less, and now more of what of tax abatement is used. Now, again, SLDC will make a recommendation. Staff will make a recommendation on what they might think is appropriate in tax incentives, and then either the LCRA board or the TIF commission will approve or reject it or modify it. And then at that point in time, then we might see that then take shape in the form of a board bill that goes before the Board of Aldermen. And then the Board of Aldermen typically hears that in the HUD's committee. And then if it proceeds through, and again, things can be amended along the way or rejected. But if it's advances out of the HUD's committee, then it goes to the full Board of Aldermen for a vote. And then if it gets out of the full Board of Aldermen, then it goes to the mayor for signature. And the mayor can, of course, veto. And then, there's the veto process as well. But that's the general process. And note that SLPS has some representation on the TIF commission with 2 members. And it's nice to see some new faces. I think maybe, will you be on the TIF commission? No? Okay, all right. I know Angie Banks was. And then we have Andrew Arkles as well represented on that. He's a citizen that was appointed by SLPS. But there's no representation of SLPS on the LCRA board. So that's something that hopefully will change in the future. Now, just kind of something that's really important now here is that you may remember a couple years ago there was a public corruption bribery scandal involving the Board of Aldermen and tax incentives. It was a low point in St. Louis development history, but unfortunately I don't think it's necessarily was all too uncommon. This one just made it to the judicial system. In the aftermath of that scandal, the Board of Aldermen in the 23-24 session enacted Ordinance 71620 to try to highlight transparency and accountability, to bring more public engagement to the incentive process. And as part of that, when advocates like myself saw that this bill was being introduced, and we suggested, hey, let's get some voice, some input from SLPS in the incentive process. Again, that's where the decisions mostly affect the organization. So now I want to also mention that in some states, school boards are empowered to veto or to approve incentives that affect their budgets. That's not the case in Missouri, but we want to emulate as much as possible, to empower the Board of Education as much as possible to ensure that projects really benefit us the most. And when we do that, great things can happen. Just real quickly, SLPS is required to be notified of projects seeking incentives that are more than $1 million. In any position that is taken by the Board of Education is to be included in the board bill. So we can see when a bill is filed in what's called the developer proposal report, has SLPS been properly notified? Have they taken a position? A position does not have to be taken, but we encourage that to happen. Now, again, there's been some issues with proper notification in the development reports, but hopefully that will be resolved. Now, Molly's going to go over this more in a bit, but in general, a couple big questions that we have. I'm sorry. Oh, I think we're missing a slide. Is when we're reviewing is the incentive truly necessary? And if help is needed, does it have to be in the form of property tax that affects SLPS? Are there alternatives, other sources of funding? And we saw that again with the Koken project where that was the case. And also then again, does it provide affordable housing, especially for our families? And then just for my last slide before turning it over to, again, back to Molly, is the SLDC has developed a scorecard to review proposals. And this is a step forward, again, from the past, but it does need improvement. Some areas in particular that we've seen that are weaknesses in their scorecard is that it's really easy to score points. The more points you get and accrue, then the more that they justify some level of recommended tax abatement. There's a couple issues in particular that we've seen. It's really easy to score points on what they consider to be affordable housing, but really aren't appropriate in our thinking. And then also some of our most invested neighborhoods like Soulard and parts of the Central West End are oddly identified as distressed neighborhoods, and it's harder to accrue points in some North City neighborhoods compared to the Central West End or Soulard, and that's kind of strange. Those are just some examples that we've seen with some problems there. And just to then to mention then, so at the end of the day, when projects are reviewed, under no circumstances should the Board of Education feel that, well, just because it's scored high by SLDC does not mean that it's a good project for SLPS and that tax abatement or TIF should be supported. And what are our recommendations? What do we want to see with development? So with that, Molly will present some of our recommendations from the Parent Action Councils, our Housing Incentives Committee. And we understand that this is just getting the conversation going, and we look forward to getting feedback. So thank you so much.
Thanks, John. So I want to pause for a second. This might be new information, or some of it might be new, or for some of you, this might be really old hat. So any questions or comments so far on what we've been talking about, or big picture, small details, anything? Or should I keep going? I'll keep going. Okay. So we have 5 recommendations, and I'll just go through them one by one. The first is, like John mentioned, we now have by law, by city ordinance, the right to information about proposals that are basically asking, the way I think we should think about it is they're asking us to subsidize them. Even if it's a luxury development and we are a high poverty district, when they're asking for a property tax abatement, they're saying we want to get a property tax break, which mostly affects SLPS, because without it, the project won't happen, because there's some benefit to SLPS for whatever reason. But this is really a new situation where we have the right to weigh in. And we are supposed to be getting notification about proposals that are coming across SLDC's desk. And I understand that it's been this committee where those proposals have been reviewed in the last year. And so if I were on this committee, I would want to make sure that I had enough time to really review those proposals so that I could weigh in on them. And that is definitely not always the case. There's only been one bill out of the last 11 that have actually been in compliance with our local law. So I think it really makes sense, this is our first recommendation, that the Board of Ed or this committee simply ask St. Louis Development Corporation to receive that information with enough time to properly review it. And again, I'm not on the committee, so a humble recommendation, but if I were, I would want at least 5 business days, because these are really complicated deals, and the information that's provided often isn't enough to really make a decision. So I think it's very reasonable to ask St. Louis Development Corporation, and Zach Wilson is typically the point person there, to share any future incentive proposals with this body at least 5 to 7 days before the next meeting of this body. And so then when it's time to weigh in, yay, we love it, nay, we hate it, this is really complicated, we don't know, at least you'll have enough time to review it so that you can come, with an educated position. We also think that in addition to the materials that SLDC typically provides, it's really important that we understand all the incentives being requested. So John gave the example of this Koken condo building. It's in my neighborhood. SLDC said, okay, even though they're getting all these historic tax credits, all these other sources of financing, if they don't get this extra million, was it a million, in real estate tax abatement and property tax abatement, this project, it's gonna crash. There's no way this can go forward without SLPS subsidizing it. Well, with some pushback, lo and behold, we were able to take the tax abatement away, and the project still went through. So just because SLDC says this is a no-go without SLPS money, that's not always the case. The developer will always say that because they don't want to pay taxes, but we need to really go through these proposals with a fine-tooth comb. So part of that is asking what other incentives have been applied for. We think, again, the Parent Action Council thinks that real estate taxes should be the last source of development financing considered. Have you looked at different types of historic or low-income housing tax credits and things like that? There are other sources of revenue out there. You don't need to come for our money first. So we want to know, again, if I were on this committee, I'd want to know, well, what other monies have been sought, and what is the total amount of revenue that will be diverted from SLPS if this project goes through? Again, sometimes that information might be hidden in the fine print, but that is a, top line important piece of information I think that it would be important for this committee to consider. What is the cost of this project to SLPS? And then you move forward with the question, do we want to support this or not? So again, John mentioned the proposal or the process for reviewing proposed tax incentives in St. Louis. Historically, SLPS, if we've been consulted at all, it's been very late in the game. So basically, this project is already like 99% cooked before SLPS weighs in. We would like SLPS to be notified much earlier in that process, like before it goes to the first review board. And again, I think this is something that's very reasonable for us to request of the St. Louis Development Corporation. Again, pause there. Any questions or discussion on this one? And I know, this is a formal presentation. I'm happy to talk later. I'm curious as to whether or not, this has been happening, whether we've been getting timely information from SLDC.
I'd like to say yes. This is kind of like a review and confirmation of we're on the right track.
Great.
And I like what you're saying because we've been doing that. So,
awesome.
Thank you.
Good. And we don't know everything you know. So if this is old news, then I'm so happy. All right. Could we have the slides again, please? So our second recommendation, or kind of our offering, is we would like to just be more involved. Please consider us as a partner in this process. The Real Estate Committee on the Board of Education has a parent representative from the Parent Action Council, and we would be so happy to provide a representative on this committee as well, if you think you could use our assistance. We've been working on these issues for a long time, and we can also, sort of regardless of what happens at this stage of the process, we have been mobilizing parents to weigh in on projects throughout this process, and we'll continue to do that regardless. But I think it makes for a healthier conversation when it happens as early as possible so that people don't feel like they were blindsided. It's like, oh, it went through SLPS. Why are these parents challenging it now? Well, if things can be more transparent and we can try to come to consensus earlier, I think that's a win-win for everybody. So that's something we would love for you to consider. Number 3 is affordability standards. So like I started with, one of our 2 main objectives on our committee is creating new housing opportunities, supportive housing, deeply affordable housing for all of our kids is absolutely unacceptable, as I assume that you all agree that so many of our kids are unhoused. And so tax incentives are one way to get to some of those housing solutions. They're not going to do it all, but they could be part of the puzzle. And so we think that if tax incentives are being used to help subsidize a deeply affordable housing development, we think that that's a good use of incentives if it brings the rent down to rents that our families can really afford. Also, if there are only studios and 1 bedrooms, that's not family housing, right? And so for this to be housing for our families and our kids, ours as a district, it has to have at least 2 bedrooms. Otherwise, I don't consider that family housing. Or if there's a monetary CBA, so like a community benefits agreement in place where the developer says, hey, we're building condos, this isn't affordable family housing, but we will try to make you whole. So we will make, again, it has to be specific, we will make $1 million payments every year for the next 15 years, something that is in writing that we can hold them accountable to so that we can sort of recoup some of our lost revenues. And so when we talk about affordability, that's a term that's easily abused, even a $2,300 apartment is affordable to somebody, right? But we're talking about our families who are homeless or at risk for homelessness. So by the conventional definitions, again, this is probably old news to many of you, but when we talk about affordable housing, that means that a household is paying less than 30% of its income on their housing costs. And so the big question we need to ask of any development is, if they're calling it affordable, affordable for whom? And the way that by typical housing subsidy programs, the way that that question is answered is as a percentage of the area median income. So basically, the Department of Housing and Urban Development looks at the whole St. Louis region, and they look at, for a family of that size, what is the median income across the whole region? And we're going to target housing to a certain percentage of that median. So I know it's confusing. That's why I gave you the slides and gave you some examples. Typically, when we talk about low-income housing, that would be 50% of the area median. Or in our region, that would be family for households making like $51,000 a year for a family of 4, or rents at like $1,100. Probably a lot of you would agree with me that that's like pretty expensive. A lot of our families are not making anywhere close to $51,000. So where the biggest need is, and there's been research showing this, is really at that extremely low income level, which is 30% of AMI. These are households who are making $31,000 or maybe far less. And those rents would need to be down in the range of $700 or less. So a very far cry from what the market is currently providing. And so we really recommend prioritizing, again, giving this committee's thumbs up to projects that are really hitting those needs, and specifically with 2 or more bedrooms in the developments. Our 4th recommendation is, well, a developer says, I'm not in that business. We do luxury. We don't do affordable housing. Okay, we'll still talk to you, but you need to explain to us why we, a low-income district, should be subsidizing a luxury development. We just shouldn't be. So if you can basically pay us back, use the rest of the real estate taxes, but pay back the amount to SLPS through the form of a monetary CBA, a community benefits agreement. And again, it needs to be in writing, it needs to be concrete, it needs to be clear that this money is not just gonna get paid to like the community, because again, like affordability, everyone wants to be the community. Like, what does that mean? If it's SLPS money, the community in CBA means SLPS. So that should be, again, part of our budget discussion. An example is Albion Tower, but I don't know all the details. I know Albion, there was a CBA attached to this big, some of you might recognize the building to the right is that kind of, it looks like an upside-down cheese grater in the Central West End across from Forest Park. This new proposed tower has a CBA attached to it, and I'm not sure if all the details have been ironed out in terms of it being.
I'll mention real quickly, the developer had supposedly committed to a $1.2 million contribution. And now it's never ironed out where that money would go. And there's some talk definitely a recommendation that I would suggest is that the board get in touch with SLBC about the status of these talks of where the $1.2 million would go, because the project is advancing, and I think they hope to break ground this summer.
Yeah, so again, this is a luxury development in one of the hottest parts of town. It makes no sense for SLPS to be subsidizing it. So for future projects, it should be made really clear in the development agreement, any CBA is to be paid directly to St. Louis Public Schools. And then our last recommendation, this is, we would hope that just any public body would already be meeting these standards, but we actually have a lot of room to grow on this. That's just government transparency. We want all public entities, SLDC, our Board of Alders, and ourselves to be held to a high standard in terms of just being very clear about what is being considered, what's being proposed, the positions that are being taken, and how board members or committee members are voted on these things. So the Sunshine Act is our Missouri law requiring government transparency. That has to do with things like timely posting of committee minutes and agendas. So that's really important, again, for us and for all of these different city entities, as well as, the recording of votes, where, how they happened, who voted how. Those things should be held in open session. It is different if we're dealing with an SLPS-owned property and dealing with, of course there are certain things that should be happening in closed session. But if this is a project like the Albion Tower, where this is not SLPS-owned, this is a developer that's basically trying to get, again, in my understanding, it's like trying to get our money, it should be a matter of public record how we all voted on it. And I actually think that it is in the best interest of this committee in terms of just like protecting you all. This is tricky business. 3, alder people, including the president of the Board of Aldermen, went to prison over corruption. It's scary, it's complicated. I think like the healthiest thing for us all and for the system as a whole is to have a lot of sunshine, a lot of transparency, so that there's no sort of side dealing and stuff like that. I think it's just the safest way to go, and it's also the law. So that's it for our presentation. We have at the end of your packet a list of acronyms, because there's, like John said, there's this never-ending alphabet soup. We also have some references. For those who are newer to this, we're happy to talk anytime. We're happy to come back to this committee. We're happy to put someone on this committee if you would have us. We've done other work kind of more slowly than we did today, breaking down what these tax incentive programs are, and sort of like the good, the bad, and the ugly. We don't think that they're all good or all bad. We think that there are good deals and bad deals, and we just need to be more judicious and intentional with what we support with our main source of revenue. That's what we got.
May I ask a question? In recommendation 2, as far as a representative from your organization on the committee, would this person be a full real estate committee member, or would they just be specifically for the tax incentives?
I mean, that would definitely be for you to decide, and I actually don't, I pay a really close attention to the tax incentives, but I actually don't see a lot of what else passes through this committee, but I would assume it would be more focused on the incentives.
Yeah, I think it would be more focused on the incentives, and I'm not even sure we would be requesting to have like a vote, as part of that, but just, to share information and kind of, as a liaison between parents and the committee, of what our views are and what we think about it, and making suggestions. There may be other things, again, down the road where you may want to seek, parent input as well. I think maybe some school closure things like, Fanning and, others, may be something that potentially, we could provide some insight on. But I think the starting point would be, just a collaboration on incentives.
And would that person report back to the PAC? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so we, basically any parent or guardian with an SLPS can be a member of the PAC. We meet monthly. We talk about everything from buses and lunches to, what we're talking about here today. We have a lobby day in Jefferson City where we fight at the state level to protect our school budget. So we have a lot going on. PAC, But this Housing Incentives Committee, now we're meeting monthly. This is, I would say, like the most active committee within PAC. So we kind of have a structure. We're still figuring out, how it all works because it is complicated and we all want to be involved in everything and we're all parents and so we're all doing this as volunteers. It's hard. But we do have a structure where we can kind of like it would probably be John, honestly, send a representative and then kind of report back to our committee, again, making sure that we are more or less on the same page. In my opinion, like sometimes some of the things that have gone through that have gotten the rubber stamp from City Hall in the past have been egregious. And like if I were a voting member of any of these boards, it would be like a hard no. Others are really complicated and probably would be well served with just as much deliberation and openness as possible. So, but I think the short answer is, yeah, like John said, sort of having a liaison. And then again, we would hope to be able to just get on the same page, come to shared understandings, and sort of support you, with regardless of what the position taken is, if that makes sense.
I just want to throw in a plug for grandmas to have housing. They can be one of the stable places for grandchildren who are experiencing difficulties. So I don't want one-bedroom luxury apartments, but when it's for elderly care apartments, I think that would be different. Also, this is a comment, not even a question. I'm sorry. But
I mean, of course, I agree with you. We don't only care about housing for kids. Mm-hmm. Every human being should have the housing they need, right?
yes.
If SLPS is subsidizing it, then, again, that's an example of one of the hard questions. If this was they were asking for a subsidy for senior housing, how would we feel about that? That would be one of those, I think, tricky examples. Like, of course, we all think it's important, but is it a priority for SLPS revenues to go to something that doesn't benefit SLPS families? That's a really hard one. But big picture, yes, of course.
Yeah, and family can have a
right.
lot of different meanings.
Amen.
And different connections. Does anyone else have any questions?
I do. Can you tell me how many, I would say, parents that are located in really disadvantaged neighborhoods that are a part of your committee or your group?
Mm-hmm. I'll say it is not, I'd say most of us live on the south side, and so we are not representative of SLPS, and we would love to change that. We've been giving talks, this is a really hard issue to mobilize volunteers on, because you start talking about tax increment financing and tax abatement, and people are like, what are you talking about? Like, it is, some issues you like feel in your gut immediately, and others are like, that sounds wonky. And so we are trying to change that. We are trying to like put these terms in people's mouths and help people connect the dots from like, well, why should I care about this? Because at the end of the day, anything that we want to do, we need a budget for. So again, and those things might be different in different parts of town. So we always would love to go talk with any PTOs. We've given talks over the years in all parts of town and are certainly open to working with everybody. But not everyone puts this as a top priority or has the time to, give to it. So very open to ideas about how we can build more bridges.
And I might add to that, again, we're a relatively new committee, and that's a very important question. That's one of our goals, is to have wide representation with the Parent Action Council and our committee. As our committee is starting to gel with some, a framework of how we feel about it, again, we're continuing to make presentations within PAC. And we're making some good progress. And I think also what we're finding is that, there are parents that really want to get into the nitty-gritty, and get involved. And then there are others that say, well, I don't really have the time to do that, but, I'd like to kind of be kept informed and updated, maybe, send an alderman, a comment. And so, the outreach, that we're engaged in at this point is kind of twofold. It's within the SLPS the Parent Action Council community, And then it's also then beginning to be a little bit more public. And at the public level, so far, it's been kind of like basically, we're not seeing in these development proposal reports that SLPS is being properly notified. What's the issue here? Hopefully that's being resolved, and when the next aldermanic session begins in April, they'll be batting 100% on what they're supposed to do with notification and information. But then, we hope to then be then more in depth on the substance of some of these bills.
And I think one more thing I'd say too is like our main objective in terms of the being sort of a watchdog over incentives is to protect the district's revenue. So we're not doing fundraisers for our schools or for, anything like that. We're trying to, work with a democratically elected body. We believe strongly in public schools, and we believe strongly in like the district as a whole, and we are excited to see, equitable patterns of investment and things like that. So we don't have budget recommendations. We are just really trying to be a stopgap or like a sort of a watchdog in terms of these possible ways that our revenues could be derailed, if that makes sense.
I just want to say I thank you so much for your service and your in-depth report. This board, we've been doing a lot of work over the last year, and all the recommendations that you spoke of, we have gone over those. But what I would like to see is perhaps us working with you some kind of way to put together some type of public service announcement on social media, because you are the face, you are the parents, and you talk the language that they can understand. And perhaps, I'm hoping that the district can work with you in that way, where you can talk with our parents and the ones who don't understand, that you can help them to understand, because you talked very clearly about how this can happen. So I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to the district developing some type of media format where we can get that message out. And thank you for everything you've done.
Great, thank you.
How you doing? Sorry I'm late, but I know you say you're pretty much on the south side. I live on the north side, which is, I'm not, but when you all have your meetings, feel free. I don't know when y'all have your meetings, but I would like to at least come and, you know what I mean? So you can feel free.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, John.
Yeah.
So our monthly meetings for the Parent Action Council, I would say at this point they're about 50-50 in person or on Zoom. Yeah, I guess maybe more Zoom, but Gloria Nolan is the parent liaison for the district, and she has been extremely helpful in just getting us to every part of town and things like that. So those are definitely open. We've had board members attend in the past, and then some board members are also parents. So we would love to have you. Yeah.
Because you make a lot,
next-
a lot of sense, because I'm sorry,
The next meeting is March 27th.
March 27th? I'll have surgery Friday. I had to do Zoom. But, what I get to say, lost my train of thought.
And I do want to say, in terms of the Parent Action Council writ large, that entity is more representative of the district as a whole than our wonky, focused Housing and Incentives Committee, for what that's worth.
And also, I'll be the first to tell you, understanding tips and all that, I was a construction worker. That stuff is hard to negotiate, so you could probably teach me some stuff. I'm just saying, it'd be good to know how to navigate those waters.
Thank you.
As she said, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, I think now we need a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Ms. Henry?
You need a second?
Oh,
Second.
sorry. Ms. Henry?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson? Dr. Borchade?
Yes.
Mr. Hikes?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Hubbard?
Yes.
All right, we adjourned. Into closed session.